There's a lot of light here. I prefer to see you though, but a warm welcome to all of you to our second day of the KIMA conference of the Marker Wadden 2022, and a special welcome to the people who are watching us in the live stream. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. You could be anywhere in the world. I'm curious, that's why I prefer to have a little bit more light in the audience. Is that possible? Because I would like to ask you a question. Who was there yesterday at the first day of the conference? Wow, so many people. More than half of the audience was there yesterday. Well, welcome back, and to the new people, welcome to your first day. I'm curious what you thought of our first day, because yesterday we discussed the research results of the past 5 years. And there are people with a microphone here in the audience. Yes. And who would like to reflect on yesterday? Who would like to say, this is what I thought of yesterday, or this is what I liked about yesterday? Yes, of course. What's your name and your organization? If it's working.
Working?
Yes.
Yeah, it's working. Harm van der Geest, University of Amsterdam. It was a science day and I heard a lot of good and critical questions, so I like that.
Ooh, during the workshops, I believe. Yeah, there were not many critical questions in the plenary session, though. And at that side of the audience, who was there yesterday? Now you don't dare to raise your hand. Shall we ask our founding father of the Marker Wadden, Roel Posthoorn? You were here yesterday speaking about birds and the word love, I remember. So what is your impression of yesterday?
Well, I thought it was very promising. And I recognize there's still a lot of questions, but the outcome is so promising. So that's my main taste of yesterday. Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Promising. Who is there anyone who would like to add something to that? What would you like the people who weren't there yesterday to remember of yesterday? Is there something in particular? One person in the back with the glasses.
Giordano Lipe, Watermotion. I'm based in the Netherlands. I can say in Dutch, er is werk aan de winkel.
Er is werk aan de winkel.
Yeah, there is a lot of things to do, actually. So it's a nice experiment. There are many failure points we discussed in the sessions. I thought it was very interesting, a very open discussions we had in the sessions I was.
Good.
But it's certainly also a challenge. It will remain a challenging project. It's not finished, and who knows when it will be finished. So it's something that has to leave where it is. So.
Okay.
I think this is a message that I got from yesterday. I'm curious about today.
Good to know. Thank you so much. So er is werk aan de winkel. It is a promising, project. And we learned a lot yesterday from our critical questions. So that was yesterday. What are we going to do today? Today we will look into the applicability of the results and the concept of Marker Wadden for other areas in the Netherlands or outside the Netherlands, and the wider context of nature-based solutions for ecosystem restoration. So that's what we are going to do today. And I hope you have your phone with you, because I would like to ask you a question via Mentimeter, so the audience who is watching us in the live stream can also join us. So I would like to invite the people in the live stream to go to menti.com or scan the QR code you see on the screen. You can do so with the photo app on your phone. And then there's no internet in here. There was a Wi-Fi code. It's on the right top. The network is KIMA 2022. And the password is KimaConf 2022. I hope that's the Wi-Fi that is actually working. My 5G is working, though. Yeah, connected? Good, that's a start. And now we are going to scan, once again, the code, the QR code, to go to menti.com. And I have a question for you, because we are going to look at the applicability of the research results, but what would you like to learn today? What would you hope? And we are making a word cloud out of this, so I'll challenge you to use 1 or 2 words. So what would you like to learn today? You can enter a topic. What kind? Adaptation pathways, practical guidelines, international application. I hope to learn about the future. Great. To upscale to other areas. The valuation of ecosystems. I'd like to learn about failures. Great one. I challenge the people in the panel to learn about failures. Much. What do you hope to learn today? Much. Market value, conservation. What a wonderful diversity of words. And the largest word I see for now is possibilities. So a lot of people like to learn about possibilities. Great. I'm curious, we are not with exactly the same audience as yesterday, so how diverse is our audience today? I'm curious what kind of organization you're working in. Are you working as a researcher or scientist? A lot of people yesterday were working in a research institute. And today that's also the case, but a lot of private companies are here as well. A few government organizations, NGOs, and other. I'm always curious to know a little bit more about more specific companies. What private companies are here today? Where are what Arcades? Waardenburg Ecology. Nice. Van Oort, of course. And I saw another hand. You can yell at me. I'll hear you. Yes. Danish landscape. I forgot. Architect. Beautiful. Sorry. Great to have international guests here as well. We had a Danish keynote speaker here yesterday. Waterbeweging, Water Motion, that's the name of your company. And what other companies are here as well who filled in other? What kind of organizations did we forget? IJsselmeervereniging. You were here yesterday as well. Great. And what other organizations did we forget? Kennis Community Oosterschelde. Wonderful. Well, good to know the audience a little bit better. Good to know what you would like to learn today. The minister will be here in a quarter of an hour. We were going to... Yeah, what are we going to do now? I'm hesitating because he should have been here already. We can watch this short movie again and then talk about the movie that is about the construction of the Marker Wadden. It's made by filmmaker Kees van Kempen. He made a longer documentary as well, which you can see online. It's 15 minutes. A lot of you have seen it, I suppose. So shall we watch the movie and then talk a bit about it until the minister is here? Let's watch.
The Dutch are world famous for mastering water and creating land from the sea. A body of seawater was split off by dam building. Disconnected from natural rivers, this inland lake began to die. Here was the perfect opportunity for Dutch ingenuity to combine with ambition. A unique project to create land from sand and excess sediments from the bottom of the lake. These sediments are also known as mud. The new land was soon discovered by passing explorers. At the same time, it was extensively researched by scientists. They began to discover the great potential of islands built with humble mud, both above and below the waterline. Marker Wadden became a living laboratory, going through several stages of development. As research moved on, nature complemented it. New phases brought new forms of life, en masse. Nature lovers were now welcomed, free to roam across the first island of the archipelago. This was just the beginning. At this early stage, over 600 plant and animal species have been recorded. And extensive research leads to more knowledge about building with mud. It's a world first in an innovative collaboration between government, the private sector, and Natuurmonumenten. If we build it, they will come.
Is it a difficult question? Yes. So, sorry, wait for the mic, please. Good morning. Do you dare to say? Yeah. Good morning. Isn't it working, the microphone? Yeah. Shall we? We will do this later then. Okay. The microphone isn't working, but I think it's for a reason, because our special guest walked in just at the time I asked a question. So I would like to have a big applause for our Minister, Mark Harbers. Yes, to be more precise, from the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. And if a minister attends an event, he must think it's a really important topic for him. So I'm curious about your speech, Minister.
And therefore I'm very sorry for my late arrival. which was due to a severe traffic accident somewhere near Amsterdam. So it's a huge traffic mess in this part of the Netherlands. But I'm very glad to be here this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, on the face of it, you'd say this conference had a classical Dutch theme. People think of the Netherlands as a country of polders, and rightly so. For centuries, we have built dikes, pumped water out, and reclaimed land. The creation of the Marke Wadden fits nearly in that tradition. And yet, on the 22nd of March in 2016, something special happened in the Marke Meer, even by Dutch standards. On that day, the Kreeft, a crane ship, started building the submerged breakwaters that would form the contours of the Marke Wadden. It marked the start of reclaiming land from the lake. But for the first time, it wasn't being done to serve economic interests, but to benefit nature and water quality. That's what makes it so special. The Marke Wadden provides a wealth of information that we're keen to share with you. So we're very delighted that you're here, and a very warm welcome to all of you. The aim of the Marke Wadden project was to restore life to the lake. Marke Meer was originally created with a view to draining it and turning it into a polder. But the plan fell through. What was left was a freshwater lake without currents or natural dynamics. Slowly but surely, living organisms were choked by advancing sedimentation. A way needed to be found to improve water quality, restore the natural balance, and at the same time boost the lake's recreational function. In 2016, the construction of the Marke Wadden marked an exciting new venture, even for a country of polders. An unusual feature was that a problem was transformed into a solution. The sediment wasn't dredged and deposited elsewhere, but instead was used as building material, a great new example of building with nature. 6 years have since passed, and 7 islands have been built. 1,000 hectares of new nature area. And we're seeing natural ecosystems recover. In the space of a few years, 47 bird species have started breeding on the Marke Wadden. The vegetation is diverse. There are 170 plant species. Insects and fish species are thriving, and the shoreline is particularly suited to juvenile fish. The water quality along the shores of the islands is also improving, and the water is becoming clearer again. We don't yet know whether this is happening on a larger scale. For that, more research is needed. And the islands also draw around 18,000 visitors each year, attracted by an emerging nature. It's wonderful to see measures working out as we intended. Ladies and gentlemen, another aim of the Marke Wadden project was to acquire new knowledge. That's why a Marke Wadden Knowledge and Innovation Program was set up 5 years ago. Monitoring and research were carried out during the construction phase, focusing not just on technical issues, but also on administrative processes. The partnership between Rijkswaterstaat, Natuurmonumenten, EcoShape and Deltares have been excellent. This new knowledge is of great value for the reform of general water management in the Netherlands, because we need new insights. For decades, we have mainly tried to keep water out, building dams and maximizing drainage. The Delta works are a good example. It was the right approach for the climate of the past. But the climate of the past is not today's climate, and it certainly isn't the climate of the future. Increasingly, the problem isn't too much water, but too little. This summer was bone dry again. Agriculture and nature struggled again. And water quality isn't as good as it should be. In short, the Netherlands needs to rethink its approach to water. We're working hard to restore streams and watercourses, making room for natural water dynamics. For example, we're giving the Meuse River room to meander, restoring tidal areas in the eastern Scheldt through sand nourishment, and using sediment and sea clay to build the sea dikes in the Eems-Dollard estuary. It's important to learn from projects like the Mark of Wadden. We can make use of this knowledge elsewhere, nationally and internationally, because other countries also struggle with issues like climate adaptation, water quality, and biodiversity. There's a lot of interest in building with nature. Take the sand motor that for 10 years now has been strengthening the Dutch coast in a natural way by making use of currents. There too, we have systematically gathered and shared knowledge and experience. 3 sand motors are now at work elsewhere in the world, and we're very proud of that. There's also a lot of international interest in the Mark of Wadden and in building with sediment, because sand is scarce worldwide and it's expensive. But there's no shortage of sediment. Building with sediment is sustainable and has great potential, but it's also complex. The lessons learned from Mark of Wadden will help us all in concrete ways. So I'm delighted that you are interested in this project. I hope it will inspire you and lead to an even greater exchange of ideas, knowledge and best practices in the field of international water management. The Netherlands is keen to share its expertise from water, not just today, where we're sharing knowledge on the Mark of Wadden, but also at COP27 in Egypt later this year. There, we want to launch an international champions group for deltas and coastal areas. A forum in which delta countries, delta cities, knowledge institutions and financial organizations will jointly work on proposals to make deep deltas resilient. We'll be presenting the first work program and initial analysis at the UN 2023 Water Conference that we're co-hosting with Tajikistan in New York next March. The aim is to make international water agreements and draw up a concrete water action agenda. And I hope that this will act as a catalyst for action and perhaps lead to more experimental projects like the Mark of Wadden. I'm proud that we're able to share our knowledge today about this unique Dutch experiment. I'd like to thank all the organizations that have worked very hard to make this happen. And I urge you all to keep sharing knowledge going forward, because there's still so much we can learn. And therefore, I wish you all a very, very productive and fruitful conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Minister. I thought you would run away immediately because because of your busy time schedule. Thank you for this great talk. Shall we continue with our forum debate? Because we would like to know where can the idea of the Mark on Wadden be applied elsewhere, and what ingredients are important when you apply this idea elsewhere. So I have a question for you. Grab your phone and go to menti.com. I bet you have it open already. So we'll kick off this debate with the question, what enabler for building with nature do you think is most important? Is that technology and system knowledge, a multi-stakeholder approach, adaptive management, institutional embedding, or governance? Is it more the business case or capacity building? What do you think is most important? We would like to know so we can discuss with the panel about this question. And what you think is most important until now is the multi-stakeholder approach. Yesterday we also asked a question, are you most surprised with when you look at the research? And the word that was the biggest was also collaboration. So I'm not really surprised that multi-stakeholder approach is here the most important enabler according to the audience. So let's discuss if the panel also thinks this is the most important enabler. So I would like to invite our 4 panel members to the stage. Teo Wams, Mirjam Heuvelman, Bregje van Wesenbeeck and Geert de Snoo. Welcome to our panel, our standing panel here, and I would like to have an applause for them. Yes. Yeah, and they deserve an introduction, of course, because not everybody will know these persons. So Teo Wams is director at Natuurmonumenten, the NGO that initiated the Mark on Wadden. So welcome, Theo. Mirjam Heuvelman is the director of procurement and contract management at Rijkswaterstaat. And Rijkswaterstaat is the organization that manages the Marker Meer Lake and work together with Natuurmonumenten. Bregje van Wesenbeeck is the scientific... Sorry? Wesenbeeck. I'm talking too fast. Sorry. Bregje van Wesenbeeck is the scientific director at Deltares. Deltares is an independent knowledge institute for applied research in the field of water and subsurface. And Geert de Snoo, director of the Netherlands Institute for Ecology. The institute performs ecological research on biodiversity, climate change, and sustainable use of land and water. So, welcome, dear panel. And my first question to you, of course, is to reflect a bit on what the audience thought was the most important ingredient when you want to apply this idea of Mark on Wadden to other areas. And they thought, and maybe we can see this, the outcome of the Menti again. Is that possible? The most popular answer was the multi-stakeholder approach. Can you read it from there? Yeah. So, who agrees with this? And this is an open invitation for all of you. So, I would like to have just a spontaneous. Do you agree with this? Everybody is nodding. Who would like to say something about this? Why? Why do you agree with this?
Well, I could actually agree with any of them because I think they're, and I will say a few words about the multi-stakeholder approach, which I think is a very important success factor. But many of these, when you go, and I'm in over my head in this Mark on Wadden program, so I've been experiencing all these things, and they are very much interconnected. So a multi-stakeholder approach is connected to technology, is connected to capacity, etc. Yesterday, the term learning by doing was mentioned several times, and I think that was a really, well, good, let's say, the cultural source over all these factors. If I look at the multi-stakeholder approach, it really was because we had an open invitation. So any private or public party who would say, we want to contribute to this at the first time crazy idea, they're welcome, but you're welcome to contribute, not just to discuss or make things more complicated. So we got a lot of stakeholders. And another thing I would like to mention is we tried to be a really multi-stakeholder, not just making a list of, okay, that party, that party, that party, and they contribute that much money or full-time equivalents, but trying to understand what makes different parties tick. And trying not to say, but my approach is better, but okay, if you're good at procedures and I'm good at being creative, together we're a good team. And the stakeholders put forward very good people, individuals, humans, to form a team. And also that, so it's not just a theoretical multi-stakeholder, but being able to form a multi-stakeholder team. So that's just a few remarks from my side.
Great. If you want to add to that, Bregje.
I really like that this comes out of the questionnaire. But
it
I
was
think,
also your choice?
Well, I think it's extremely important to have public support for a pilot. And we see that many big or large-scale projects and infrastructure projects, that they stop if there's no public support. And that actually we have made an analysis of past building with nature pilots. And what we saw basically is that you need both. So you need public support bottom up, but you also need a front runner on the top. Because basically these projects are different. So they are sort of a paradigm shift to do something different. And I think you need both. So you need somebody that's from the top or that is a front runner or that really starts pushing for the project. And you need the public support so that there's... And we've seen that in certain situations where there's resistance for a traditional infrastructural approach, that building with nature alternatives emerged and were largely supported. So I think community participation, but that means not only of the stakeholders, but also of the public in an area, is extremely important to get these new and innovative concepts going.
Yeah, I also saw Teo nodding in the very beginning. Do you have anything to add to your colleagues?
Teo.
Oh, sorry, I'm confused now, Geert.
No, that's okay. I agree with the outcome for sure, and also with the remarks of Teo. That is all come together. What is not on the you cannot vote for that is that you need a team to tackle the problem. If you would like to build with nature, and it was a huge problem, and I think being together and go for it, I think that's the start, I would say. And what I like the most in the iconic project of the Marke Wadden is the open mindset, just learning by doing. And I hope that is something we can also sell to the outside world. Okay, don't look too much to KPIs or whatever, but just go for it with a mindset of trust in each other and also in nature. That there is room to maneuver and see what will happen in the long run.
Yeah. Last but not least.
Yeah. It's very nice to say we need to have trust to get to these kind of results. But on the other hand, and it's also stipulated here, there also needs to be a kind of business case. And of course, there is serious money involved in this project. It's 75 million euros spent. So I think that, from my point of view, what was unique in this project is to get a balance between learning by doing and really working in an adaptive way with all your stakeholders involved. But on the other hand, managing, in this case, a private company like Boskalis, with doing the right things and spending your money on the right things. And I think that's from my point of view also a key success. Of course, there's a lot of nature created and those kind of things, but also from an economic point of view, I think it's very successful how this was done. And that needs, on the one hand, being open for new ideas and being adaptive, and on the other hand, also sometimes being strict. And that balance was found in this project, which is really...
Yeah, so now we have discussed a little bit the enabler that the audience thought was most important, but you have an opinion of yourself, of course, as well, which I would like to talk about as well. So, what enabler is also very important to mention? You really need to highlight, Bregje.
Yeah, I think. So
all,
that's,
yeah.
That's why they're there. Yeah.
But if you, what would you specifically like to highlight?
Well, from my line of work, we're focusing a lot on technical knowledge. So to enable everybody to really make these kind of pilots and to monitor them, to understand what's happening in the natural system, how they respond with changing external stressors. So I would say that's really important, and I would actually like also to react on the business case. I think what we're seeing right now is that actually restoring nature, also the last IPCC report said that we can solve 1/3 of our mitigation effort in the world by restoring nature and natural resources. So I think what this is showing that in the end, nature restoration will become big business. And I think this link between, and that means it's not only something that NGOs will do, but it is also something that engineering companies and contractors and dredging firms will start doing. And this is extremely interesting because these two disciplines come together, and I don't think engineers should become ecologists, and ecologists should not become engineers, but they need to collaborate. And we do not only see that in the Marker Wadden, we, for example, already see it also in the Mississippi Delta, where they're making the large diversions of the Mississippi River, and those are really big-time, new and innovative engineering projects that are designed, constructed, and then monitored and maintained.
Yeah, the Dutch people are already quite good in exporting their technical knowledge to the outside world, especially in the United States, in other projects with water as well.
Yeah, it's why we need these kind of examples also to show what we're able to do in this field.
Yeah, and this, can you imagine this Marker Wadden example elsewhere in the world? How we can use this technical knowledge?
Well, there's already a similar example in Venice Lagoon, where they also did recreation of marshes, for example, big time with soft sediments. And I think the minister touched upon it, but reusing soft sediments. I mean, we've been seeing this not as a resource, but as something that we throw off the continental shelf. So we dredge and then we throw it in the deep sea. And that's immensely strange with the challenge we face globally, right? We have sea level rise, we have drowning deltas, eroding coastlines, so we need this resource. And there's also nutrients attached to it, which we need to build up the morphological, but also the ecological system.
Yeah, good. So we also need the technical part. What else do we need?
Well, I'd like also to comment on the business case, or simply say money. If we don't have money, we can't create such projects. I have to mention the National Postcode Lottery, which started by donating 15 million euros, saying, try it. So learn by doing, try it, try to set up this project. And it was not just money, it was also, again, a cultural act, saying, okay, we can take this risk, we can do it together, and then government bodies said, but we would like to be part of that game, we want to join. So the whole adventure started. So there again, I'm also in my mind thinking, okay, phase 1, Marker Wadden phase 2, what can we learn from phase 1 going to phase 2? This kind of building up the business case, also by learning by doing, is very important. And learning by doing, if you only learn, you never do anything, but if you only do, you never learn anything. So we need KIMA. And actually we need it to continue in one way or another, because we are still working in the Lake Markermeer. And well, we see here how important this knowledge is, both on the, let's say, the hard side, the ecology, the dynamics, but also on the cultural and governance side.
Yeah, good.
So,
good, the minister is still here.
I'm looking.
So, but could we somehow export this governmental, organizational knowledge as well?
It's always difficult to if you say export to other countries.
Exactly.
Difficult to say, because that whole cultural side is, of course, very, very specific for different countries. But you were making some remarks about that.
Yeah.
Let's hope so. And I think it would be a great challenge for, I'm from an NGO, from a nature conservation NGO, for other nature conservation NGOs, and we work together with them to step forward and say, we can do it.
Yeah, beautiful. Geert.
I think we are proud on the mud we put together. And that learning by doing, and I think it's also a lot, okay, how do you learn? And how are we proud on what we are doing? How that step, that's really very successful in this Marke Wadden project. So it's telling the story and communicate with society, that's important. But also from a scientific point of view, there should the data. That the data are fair and open and reusable for other science cases. I call this a science case. By learning by doing, okay, that should be based on data. And there I think we can also, well, that's I think number 2, or it's now number 3 on the list about adaptive management. That should be science-based. And I think then it's more easy to find general rules where you can go for in other situations. Yeah. So let's go for that as well.
So we always need scientific institutions to join the project.
Yeah, and also communicate. Putting the data together, make them open and reusable for other situations, and also communicate the love in the project. That's also an aspect. Data and love together, then I think you can make steps.
That's what we said yesterday.
Yes,
yes.
And beauty.
Yeah. Data and love, that's a nice one-liner to remember. All right, Mirjam, do you have any enabler you would like to highlight?
I think maybe not the enabler, but reusing nature. We have a lot of discussions and we have a lot of possibility in circularity, but we are often focusing, especially in infrastructure, on steel, concrete, asphalt. But to have more focus also on reusing mud and the natural resources like sand, I think it's very important, and that's also one of my takeaways from Marke Wadden. Because as I said, we focus on other materials, raw materials, and I don't think that on the top of our mind is then to reuse really nature. And I think I'm also inviting technology companies and science to help us with that, to come to these solutions.
Yeah, so now the circle is round, so we need technology. Have a nice day. Thank you so much. Shall we give an applause? Yeah. That's a nice way. We were hesitating about it, weren't we? Yeah. It was good that he heard a part of our discussion, I think. So now we can talk about the minister, what he should do. No, I'm joking. So we need the technology as an enabler, the government. We need data and love, and we need more cooperation with all stakeholders. Good to know this. My other question is. I'm looking at my.
There's one thing I would like to remark.
Yeah. What else do we need to? Sorry. We are also almost at the end of our panel discussion, so I was looking for a conclusive idea about how are we going to bring this further. What else do we need to do?
I was inspired by the words that Geert was saying, and the word community has not yet. Been on the table, but there's a community. Well, you might say is the knowledge community of Marke Wadden, but there's the community of stakeholders, but there's also a community of several hundred volunteers running Marke Wadden every day, visitor management, excursions. There's a community of amateur scientists doing recording of species.
Citizen science.
Citizen science.
Yeah.
So, and actually my takeaway from this panel is I know it, and I'm very proud of it, but it's so important, even more important than I thought it was.
Oh, that's a good good to realize. Shall we do a round and start at the other side of the table? What is your takeaway from this panel? How should we proceed?
I think continue projects like Wadden and have clearly in mind what is the purpose, and keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. But with cooperation, seek for cooperation.
That's a good takeaway. Geert.
Keep the open mind. So if we build, nature will come. But okay, what's the next step in our 10, 50 years? And how can we continue? And they will come, but let nature just play, maybe.
Good. You have such nice one-liners. Let nature just play. Yeah.
I'm not in the business.
maybe that's why.
Last but not least, do you have anything to add, Bregje?
Yeah, my takeaway would be the monitoring, because I think we need monitoring next to these programs. And we've been implementing many large-scale programs, and often a knowledge and monitoring program was lacking till the end. Yeah. And right now it's again an issue here also. Can we continue monitoring? And I feel a bit currently we are saying we're in times of uncertainty, we don't know where we're going, and then we use that as an argument for inaction. But I think it should be an argument for action, because everything is more uncertain. We need to monitor more. Otherwise, when we start to monitor when things are urgent, we are too late. And I think we need consistent monitoring to go along and to be embedded in these type of large-scale projects. Otherwise, we won't learn, and we get stuck in some kind of inertia or limbo because we don't know what to do next.
Yeah, good. I wish the minister would have heard that. But I would have liked to ask him a question. But you all know when he is going to decide about this. If he's going to, it's in December, isn't it? What's happening in December? Can someone? He will decide what to do next with the Wadden. Jill?
That's what I heard.
That's what we heard. Okay. So, sorry, it's a bit fake still. I thought it was decided already. So, okay, I heard rumors. Let's hope the minister will be as positive and optimistic as you are, and I believe he is, I heard from his speech. So I'd like to thank dear panel for your contribution about what enablers were most important for you. So thank you so much, Teo Wams, Mirjam Heuvelman, Bregje van Wesenbeeck, and Geert de Snoo. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we deserved a great coffee and tea break. So after the break, we continue with two keynotes, two international keynotes. So I hope to see you back in half an hour. And we will continue to talk about how should we continue with the Wadden. So welcome back after your well-deserved coffee, tea break. I hope you had some nice discussions with your colleagues. Does it feel like a reunion again? Like yesterday, I had a feeling a lot of people knew each other. Today, I have a feeling we make some new connections. Some international connections as well. So that's what we are going to do right now, making some international connections. Our next speaker is from the Bay Area in San Francisco. And before I will properly announce her, I have a mentee question for you and for the people at home who are watching. Who is familiar with this area? So it's a yes or no question. Just to give our speaker an idea who is familiar with this area. And it's anonymous, so it's safe to answer no. I will not come with a microphone to you. It's also safe to say yes. Okay. Well, a quarter of the people who have answered this question, which is not everybody is familiar with this area, so that's good to know that a lot of people aren't. And another question before I'll introduce her is who is involved in sediment management? Oh, you dare to... Or do you have a question about that? You don't want to fill in the Mentimeter. Oh, does it work? All right. Yeah. Okay. I think that's more than we expected. That a quarter of the audience would be involved in sediment management. So that's also good to know. And let's call her on stage, to the front of this beautiful room. Can I have a warm welcome for Brenda Goeden?
Good morning. And for those of you who are not familiar with San Francisco Bay Area, the things I'm going to talk about, people who live in San Francisco Bay mostly don't know about them. So you're okay. Yeah. It will be new to someone from San Francisco also. So thank you very much, Desiree.
The stage is yours.
I'll go ahead and get started. So as she mentioned, my name's Brenda Goeden. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. And a state agency. And before I get started with my talk, I'll just give you a quick briefing on my talk. It's going to be a little bit about my agency, just so you know where I'm coming from. I'm going to do a comparison of San Francisco Bay and your area because as I was researching what you all have been doing here, it struck me as a very interesting comparison. So I'll spend a little bit of time there. I'll talk about the driving forces of what's happening in San Francisco Bay somewhat. Then I'll get into some examples of projects where we beneficially reuse dredge sediment, different than what you all have done because our sediment generally comes from dredging from navigation channels and marinas and such. And then very quickly, some short thoughts on the future. So the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission is my agency, and it's one of the longest named agencies in the state of California, as far as I can tell. We call ourselves BCDC generally for short, but we are a really unique agency in the Bay Area, in California in general, because we have two kinds of authority. So we have authority over the federal government through the Coastal Zone Management Act, and we were in fact the first coastal zone management program in all of the United States. And that means that we are in charge of the federal side of how the coast is treated. And in California, there's 3 coastal zone management agencies. Mine is responsible for San Francisco Bay. The California Coastal Commission, which is much more famous than we are, is responsible for the outer coast. And then there's the California Coastal Conservancy that is a funding agency that helps support many of the projects that I'll talk about today. And then we also, obviously, are a state agency. We work under 2 state laws, and we're responsible for planning for San Francisco Bay development, where it can happen, what kinds of development can happen. And then we also have a regulatory branch. I sit in the regulatory branch, and that means that we write permits for the activities that go on around San Francisco Bay, anything from building a wharf in the water or dock at your house to having a house in the shoreline. The bay itself is our jurisdiction. We have very little land jurisdiction. We have about 30 meters of land jurisdiction, so we don't have a lot of say there. And most of what we do in that area is make sure the public can get to the shore. So briefly, a comparison between San Francisco Bay and your area is we are 2 different systems. You obviously have the North Sea. We have the Pacific coast. We have both shallow areas, so our bay is on an average 18 feet deep, but it can be as deep as 350 at the Golden Gate feet, and I should be translating that to meters, so about 100 meters deep. And we're primarily muddy, so 80% to 90% of our bay is mud. There's a very little bit of sand that runs down the middle where the deep water comes through. And my understanding is you are mostly sandy. So a little bit of differences there. We're open to the tides. The marker Wadden obviously is not. So there'll be some differences in the way we manage things and the way we think about it based on the fact that we are in a tidal zone. We have two high tides a day and 2 low tides a day. So we're dealing with water changing water levels all day long. So this brief comparison, going back into history, so this map on the right is zoomed in on San Francisco Bay. It's the central part of San Francisco Bay, and this is a plan that was developed in the 1940s, about the same time that you were putting your first dam in. And there was a gentleman who, I understand his name was Reber, and this is his Reber plan. He was a theatrical person, but he also had grand plans for San Francisco Bay. And the idea here is that there would be a dam placed across that neck right there with the top blue arrow, and a dam placed across the bottom. What would happen in that case is that the top of the bay would be a freshwater reservoir. We have 2 very large rivers coming into the bay. At that end, it drains 40% of the state of California. So that would be a very large freshwater reservoir on the top. And on the bottom would be a second freshwater reservoir. So it, by and large, creating lakes, but lakes with rivering inputs. And then there would be locks to allow the water to come in and out. And then the areas that are filled in red would become fast land, used for ports, etc., and a shipping canal would go through the center. Not too different than what you have here. If you compare it to the Uslamir and the marker, there would have been very similar lake systems. In the 1940s, we didn't accept that plan. I wasn't alive then. I'm not really exactly sure why, but it didn't happen. And then looking at this other plan here, this was the 1950s and 1960s, and this was the Army Corps of Engineers. So when I was talking to some of my colleagues, I said I might want to mention to you all that the Army Corps of Engineers, while it's military, actually is a civil works group. So they're in charge of building dams, dredging navigation channels, reservoirs, and making sure that people are safe from flooding. So they're a very significant civil works organization, but part of the federal government. And so their plan in the 1950s was to fill in San Francisco Bay, except for that black part, which they would have left as a river system. That was resoundingly rejected by the community, the San Francisco Bay citizens. They all contributed $1 in 1960s to save San Francisco Bay. They created a nonprofit, Save the Bay, which in turn created my agency, which today we continue, both the nonprofit and our agency continue on today, working to make sure the resources of the Bay are protected and that we have responsible development. This is a side note, but I thought there might be some people in the audience who might get a kick out of this because I know there's modeling that's done. And so when we were examining the idea of filling in San Francisco Bay for a river system, the Army Corps of Engineers built a scale model, and this still exists today, it's a museum, but it literally modeled out all the rivers and sloughs of San Francisco Bay, and it's quite large. I think if I translate it, it's about 650 square kilometers. Not the model, the bay itself. But if you walk around this, it is still quite large, and even all those little tabs in there, they would bend them. They're copper tabs. And that would help you understand how the tides and currents would change. Here's a close-up of part of it. And this model actually helped us make that decision about not closing off San Francisco Bay and creating a river system out of it. So I just thought I'd throw that in there because I know there's some modelers in the group. Another couple of things that are important to San Francisco Bay in our history is we had the gold rush. I'm sure you've all heard of it, early days. This gold rush brought 250 million cubic yards of sediment, primarily fine grain, washed down from the mountains into San Francisco Bay and raised parts of the bottom of the bay by 1 meter. So there's a lot of extra silt. And then we also have plumbed the delta so that much of our fresh water is controlled coming into San Francisco Bay, and a lot of it goes to Southern California, where I actually hail from. The people in Northern California are mad at the people in Southern California because we take the water and send it south, but it is necessary for agriculture and drinking water. As a result of these changes, there's been a very interesting scientific thing that has happened, or scientific note. So we are in United States Geological Survey, another large research branch of the federal government, monitors the amount of suspended sediment coming into San Francisco Bay on a daily basis. And what they noted was about 1998, we started to see a step decline in the sediment supply coming into the bay from the delta. And it has persisted. This graph, if it went out today, we are seeing a much lower suspended sediment supply to our bay, which for us makes us even more concerned about what we can do for restoring marshes and maintaining marshes that we have today. So this is one of our driving factors on how we think about sediment and why it's so special in the region. So San Francisco Bay today, just to give you some quick facts, about 650 square kilometers. We've got 9 counties, 54 cities, 13 million people surrounding this bay. So it's a very dense area. Federal channels, we have 17, we have 5 ports, we have 7 oil terminals, and we've got nearly 100 marinas that we deal with, and they all dredge sediment from the bay to maintain the channels because the sediment is constantly filling in. So if you want to have navigation, we do have a deep channel that's 42 meters deep, and that's our deepest channel, and it's constantly being filled in. So we dredge that area annually, creating sediment that's in excess. So then we also, through the history of our region, have lost nearly 80% of the wetlands in San Francisco Bay, 90% of the wetlands in the state of California altogether. The areas around the bay, because of our historic diking and draining of the tidal marshes that were there in the 1850s, we have created what we call subsided baylands. You call them polders. Some of them have been built on, and some of them are open land still, particularly in the north and in the south. We, as a community in the 1990s, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, have a regional agreement that we want to restore 100,000 acres of wetlands, and I think that translates to about 45,750 hectares of wetlands. I did write that down last night. And then, of course, we're a very flat environment. We're an estuary. We've built out on the flatlands. And so we're very seriously looking hard at sea level rise and what we're going to do. Are we going to basically build up our levees around the shoreline? Are we going to move back? Are we going to build wetlands? What are we going to do? One last bit of really kind of shocking and important information is that we have scientists who have looked at the idea, if we were to restore all of the areas that we plan to, what would it take sediment-wise? And they looked at a wet climate scenario and a dry climate scenario. And in that area, they looked and found that we would need between 345 million and 500 million cubic meters of sediment. I got it right on that slide. So I mentioned that we have a lot of different things going on in San Francisco Bay. I threw this up here. It's really complicated. I didn't give you the legend because it would be too hard to see. But basically, if you look at these dashed pink lines, that is areas where we mine sand, but we mine sand not for nature-based reasons generally. That mine sand is for construction, primarily asphalt, concrete, buildings, etc. The pink are the federal navigation channels and the other areas that we dredge around the bay. So, and then some of the smaller projects are in purple, so all along the face of San Francisco waterfront, these smaller areas are all areas that we dredge. The bright green are areas where we've been working to restore wetlands. And this is just central San Francisco Bay. Zoom out, it's much larger. So I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit more about how we get the sediment that we use, and then I'll talk about what we've been doing with it. So as I mentioned, we do a fair amount of navigation dredging. We do 1.2 to 2.3 million cubic meters a year, so it's not a lot. I was just recently listening to a talk about Texas, and they were doing 10 times the amount of dredging that we were doing. So we're like really proud that we got this much sediment. We know it's not enough. We look at other areas and people are doing much more than we do, but we're trying our best to put it to good use. There was a program that we created in the late 1990s and have been working on ever since, which focuses on reusing dredge sediment. So we used to just throw it away, and we still do, unfortunately, dispose of a fair amount of it today. But in this slide, you'll see these 4 dots inside of the bay. Those are aquatic disposal sites, and so where we have and regularly dispose of clean dredge sediment on a regular basis. The one outside the bay, that's about 3 miles out. I can't translate that one right now. Well, but those are all near shore disposal sites where clean sediment gets disposed. And then this one, way over here, that says SF Dodds, that is the San Francisco Deep Ocean Disposal Site. It's the deepest ocean disposal site in anywhere in the United States. It's at about 3,000 meters offshore. And when we take sediment out there, it's completely lost to the system. Not ever going to come back. It goes off the continental shelf, and there it stays. In these disposal sites, they're dispersive. The sediment moves around, but it's not being used. It's just being disposed of and getting redistributed in the system. The program that I work on is looking at trying to turn that around and use the sediment instead. And so right now, our goal is to maximize beneficial reuse. Maximizing means about 40%. We actually need to do much better, and we've got new program work coming up to try to increase that number, but so far we've been reusing about 40% on an annual basis of the sediment that we dredge. So, we have this goal to restore these acres, and what we're trying to get back to is these historic marshes. This marsh is called China Camp. It is one of our most pristine marshes around, where the vegetation is very good, the wildlife is very good, it supports endangered species and native species. It's got those beautiful dendritic channels, really healthy marsh. So some of the things that we're dealing with when we're trying to get back to this is that we have, as I said, these deeply subsided sites. We have broad mudflats in front of most of the areas that we want to restore. Some of them are several miles wide, which means that we can't get equipment very close by. So we can bring scows up full of dredge material, but then we have to pump them onto the sites, which costs time and energy and a lot of additional equipment. A lot of the levees on the bay side are degraded, so if we're not going to restore these areas, we have to take care and maintain them, those levees, because otherwise the bay will come back into those areas, whether we like it or not. We have urban development on the backside of almost every wetland that we have in every area that we want to restore, so there's a limited space. We call it the coastal squeeze. And there's not a lot of transitional habitat going between the marsh and the upland areas, such that animals have a place to transition to, especially during high tides, because during high tides they don't have land to be on. And we're always wanting this to be adaptable to sea level rise, but we're dealing with a range of sea level rise, so we're kind of trying to figure out, like, what range do we build in and how long will it last? So I'll tell you some of our projects. So this is one of the very first projects that we did using dredge material. It's called Sonoma Baylands. It's in the northern part of the bay. This area along the bottom is a fringe marsh. That marsh was created as part of the gold rush. The gold rush sediment came down, and we have these narrow bands of new marsh. But you can see they have very straight channels. They don't have those dendritic channels, which are so important to the real health of the marsh. And behind them, this is one of our levied off areas. We have this subsided land, and part of it was agriculture, and some of it was just, land that wasn't used. And so we did some design work, and by we, I'm meaning the community, not me. I wasn't working on this type of work at this time. This was the 90s. But one of the important things that they modeled was the wind wave, and I know in one of the sessions yesterday we talked about the wind and how it affects Marker Wadden. Here, we also think a lot about wind and the size of our sites, because the longer the wave fetch, the more erosion we get along the edges, and so we put peninsulas or berms into the sites to break down that wind fetch. And those also serve to drop the sediment out. As the wind slows down, the sediment drops out, and you get more sedimentation more quickly. We filled it up with about 3 million, and I'm sorry I'm not translating all of these. I had them translated, but I don't remember them in my head. About 3 million cubic yards of mud And this came from a deepening project at a port. We got it up to a foot, about a foot, so a third of a meter of the marsh plain elevation, and we opened it back to the bay. We cut a hole in the levee, crossed that marsh, and let the water come back in. We didn't carve the channels, nature carved the channels, but where we put the berms helped decide where the channels would go. And that was developed with modeling. And over time, within 15 years, the sediment was finished off, vegetation was coming. Within 20 years, we had fully developed marsh. And this is what it looks like today. Imagine those speckles are different kinds of vegetation, but it's an extremely healthy marsh. When we started this project, the resource agencies were particularly skeptical. There was concerns over toxic dredged material. It was clean material. We tested it. We made sure it was clean. But there's always concern, because if you think about dredged material, people immediately think toxic. And there was concerns that it just wouldn't work. And even the people who are the biggest naysayers today are saying this is one of the most successful projects they'd seen. And the quickness in the restoration was really, really good. So normally if you don't fill in a site, they estimate 60 to 70 years to get to marsh plain. Here we did it in 15. So that was a big success. Two more that were done the same way, so I'm going to go quickly between these two. But some of the interesting differences is the Hamilton wetlands. This took about 5.6 million cubic yards of sediment. Came from the Port of Oakland deepening project, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. But the interesting thing about this one is it was a military base. So this was an Army military base, an Army airfield. And the first thing that had to happen was it had to be transferred from the federal government to the state. We got it for $1, so that was good. Because it was surplus, they didn't want it anymore, it was a mess. The second thing that had to happen was a base realignment and closure, which means that the military had left contaminants on the sites. They had to be cleaned up and dealt with, capped, or taken off the site before we could even begin the wetland restoration, and that was several years in the making. And then we filled it with dredge material, and then we breached it to the bay. And this one we breached in 2014, and it is quickly vegetating, which is a very good sign. The other thing we did with this one, which is a little bit different, is this north part that looks white, that long stick in the top. That is an experimental design on seasonal wetlands. No one has ever built seasonal wetlands in our region. We just don't know exactly how to do it. So we've designed a site where the whole idea is to let it dry out during the dry season, let the marsh birds use it for nesting, and then when it rains, it becomes a wetland again. So that's an experiment. It's going well. There are definitely some failures, but there's things that are going well. And so it's a little bit different than any restoration site in the region because no one's tried that before. So that's our experimental lab. Montezuma Wetlands is another one of these sites where we're filling it with dredge material. This one's going to take 17 million cubic yards over time. We've opened the first phase, which looks like that now. It's quite beautiful. A couple of things that are interesting about this project. One is a privately owned wetland restoration. Hamilton and Sonoma Baylands are a public wetland restoration. Montezuma is an investor-based restoration. I can't talk to the details of that because I don't know too much about it, but I know there are investors who've put money into this and are hoping to get money out of it someday. There's a tipping fee to bring dredge material here, so money is being made from bringing the dredge material and the cost of it. The other thing that's interesting about this site, it's the only site in the region that will take elevated levels of contamination. And so there are cells in the back of the site that are deep. They're very deep cells. We can put a certain amount of quality sediment, of poor quality sediment in it, and then we cap it with 3 to 5, a meter to a meter and a half of sediment, eliminating the biologically active layer from the contaminated area. Only place in the region that will take that material. It can't take really contaminated material, but it can take some challenged material. So this project that I'm going to talk about now is Middle Harbor Enhancement Project. This one is a little bit different in that we're not trying to build a wetland here where we're trying to restore a subtidal habitat. So my very poorly drawn yellow lines are the Oakland inner and outer harbor. This is our biggest port, and it's the one that's down 42 meters deep for our biggest ships coming in, the container ships. And it needed to be deepened a few years. It went from 42 feet to 50 feet, however that's translated. And one of the ways that we were able to use this sediment both at Hamilton and Montezuma, some of it went to both, was to do a shallow water restoration site immediately within this project. So this bright yellow star shape in the middle, that's where Middle Harbor is. And the idea is you could save money by disposing of the dredge material immediately next door. You don't have to transport it, you don't have to pump it, you could just put it there. Now, why was that site a good site to do that? Historically, this area was a marsh. Doesn't look like a marsh anymore. It's never going to be a marsh again. But adjacent to the marsh, it had very nice shallow water habitat with eelgrass in it. And so the idea was we could raise the elevation back up. It had been to minus 40 feet. So we raised it back up to about a meter deep. Here is I don't know why that was an animation, but here's the plan. So the idea is this whole area would be filled with that dredge material. A jetty was put in place, so sheet pile jetty to hold the material. We stacked 40 feet, 10 meters or so, 10 plus meters or so of sediment in there under the water, contained it, we let it settle. Had to settle for a really long time for those of you who are dealing with consolidation. In all of these sites, we have to deal with consolidation. We have to build up higher to let it settle. But this one was particularly difficult and different for us because no one's done this before in our region. And so the land had to settle under the water, and we waited for several years for that to happen. Once it happened, we needed to sculpt it. So the light blue areas are the very shallow areas, and those are the areas that are targeted for eelgrass planting. This is a bathymetric map of what it looks like today as far as how the sediment looks. So you can see now in yellow, those plateaus are the areas where we've planted eelgrass. 1 minute, is that what you're telling me? Oh, I'm really got to stop soon. Okay. And we have some bird islands. We have a future marsh coming through. And the borrow pit is where sediment was taken from the material that we dredged up into those yellow areas. I'll show you quickly. So this is where we're at the moment. This area was a little bit higher than shallow on purpose. This is supposed to eventually be a marsh. It's not high enough. We're going to have to come back and put some more sediment in there and then plant it because it's not going to work the way it is now. Those rock islands were developed using some of the material from the jetty. We didn't want to just throw it away, so we built some rock islands for cormorants and pelicans. They like them, but because they're heavy, they were hard to build because we had to get into shallow water with big, heavy barges, and so they were kind of flinging the rocks into the island areas, as I understand it. But then consolidation again, you put heavy rocks on soft mud, they start to sink. So those probably are not going to persist the way we had hoped in the future. That's one of our volunteers planting eelgrass out there, literally root down a piece at a time with a bamboo twist. And we've already got wildlife coming back in. This is one of the best bird watching areas that you can see in this region, really close to the shore. So we have wildlife using it. We're not done with it. We were supposed to be done with it probably 6 years ago. We're still working. I'm going to do 2 more projects. I'm going to go over my time quickly. This project is really interesting, probably inspired by your sand engine, where we're looking at the idea of can you put mud in the water and get tides and currents to push it onto the marsh. So the top figure is really a schematic on how the marsh works ideally, and here's our bottom schematic on how we hope the sediment would move schematically. But remember, San Francisco Bay has tides, it has currents. So the fact that this schematic says, oh, all the sediment is going to move straight to shore is probably not quite right. I convinced people while we were designing this to add these little tiny arrows going sideways, because I think some of it's going to go sideways. So just moving quickly, we looked at all of these sites for possibilities is where we might try this. This is literally a pilot. We have no idea. Well, we do have an idea how much it's going to work at this point. But the idea here is that can we augment marshes who need sediment that already exist with fine layers coming in? We did some modeling. The red is the area where the sediment would be placed. They're looking at doing 750,000 cubic yards placement. The blue is where it has dispersed to about 1/10 of a centimeter. The yellow is about 1 millimeter. The target area is over there. So the bottom one on the right corner, that blue, that's our target area. But the challenge here is that we can't get the scows in close enough to really get the sediment going to where it wants to go. So we're going to give this a try. We're going to try it next year. We're going to monitor the heck out of it. One of the challenges is that the monitoring might not even work because this is such a fine amount of sediment in a system that's already moving sediment that we may not have fine enough scales and measures to actually be able to measure this properly. So that in itself will be one of its own challenges, and the monitoring is a pilot. So the project is a pilot, the monitoring is a pilot, and we're just going to see how it goes. And I'm not going to talk about this very long, but I threw this in yesterday because one of the conversations was about how can you reduce wind wave, what else can you do? This has got some sediment involved in that concrete used some bay sediment, but these are some oyster reef arrays. We have little oysters that don't really build reefs in San Francisco Bay. They have them on the East Coast, but the idea here is that you could build things that oysters would attach to. And you can see the white dots that say oyster reefs. We're testing out whether or not putting reefs of different types in could help reduce waves as they hit the shore and thereby reduce some wave energy and help the marshes survive longer because we have eroding edges. We're also planting eelgrass in with that. But I just put that in because I thought it might be interesting to folks who are thinking about reducing wind wave energy. Here's what it looks like in the field. They're placed in areas where they see them at the lowest tides, but the highest tides you don't see them too much. And they're interspersed different kinds of these reefs, so they're testing different structure shapes and what the oysters like the best. And they're also testing putting eelgrass in there as well to help reduce wave energy with vegetation, but at the same time provide a very specific habitat. I'm going to skip that because I'm almost done. So those are some of the things we've been doing. Primarily, our goal has been restoring habitat. Not necessarily in the last 20 or 30 years so much as dealing with sea level rise, but now we're dealing with sea level rise. This map is what 1 meter of sea level rise looks like in San Francisco Bay because we're still open to the ocean, right? So we're not closed off, and we're not planning on closing ourselves off, although people propose it every so often. So all the areas in blue, the dark blue, is where we'll have inundation at 3 feet, 1 meter, 3 feet. And then the light blue are areas that we'll see during certain storm surges. And you can run different scenarios. We're running different scenarios to try to understand what our future looks like. I bring this up because even though we've been focused on restoration for restoration's sake, we are now turning to nature-based solutions to try to help us address sea level rise. And so we're taking this next step where we're translating sediment for ecosystem only to sediment for habitat sea level rise adaptation with habitat rather than just a hard solution. Probably won't work for the highest levels of sea level rise, but we're going to be taking an incremental approach where we're building out and trying to help nature adjust as we adjust. And with that, I want to thank you all for your attention.
And let's see if there are people with the microphones again. We don't have time for it, but I would like to have this information sink in like sediment. So let it sink in a little bit. And we have I allow time for 1 or 2 questions. So the sediment expert in the front.
Well, it's not about sediments, but we this morning we heard about the importance of public support And what is the public reaction of all your work?
Well, some of it, like as I mentioned, some of it the public doesn't know about, but the public in San Francisco Bay is a very, actually in the United States, I'm going to just go right out there and say it's a very unique community because we are super focused on the environment, taking care, good water quality, good health, public availability for open spaces. And I can say that very firmly because in 2016, not so long ago, the 9 Bay Area counties voted 70% vote to tax themselves to pay for restoration projects. So every parcel of property that we own pays $12 a year, which is not very much money, but it adds up to $50 million over 25 years. And that money is specifically going to restoration, water quality, public access, all of these things that we're doing. We did a very specific, I say we again, not me, but the community and the people that I work with, did a very specific campaign to get that to work. They waited till the right time, the right message, but the community resoundingly agreed that this is very important to the region. So I can say that the public's response is very good, and that they are looking to us to make good on that promise that we will do this work.
Then I'm curious, would it be a good idea to do this in the Netherlands as well, to make the audience, the public, ready and make them pay? Yeah, I saw some sparkles in the eyes, so that's why I would like any person who becomes enthusiastic of this idea. No? It has to sink in? It has to sink in. Okay, we'll get back to that later at lunch. So thank you so much for your talk, Brenda Goeden. So we have one keynote speaker about a totally different topic before lunch, and before I announce him, I'll announce what he's working on. He's working at the Asian Development Bank in the Philippines, in Manila, as a water resources specialist. So that's a completely different topic, and I'm curious if you are somehow familiar with it. So grab your phone once again, and I have a question. Who is involved in finance? Is anyone an expert in this field? It's good to know how many financial people. No personal finance. Ooh, only one? Only one. Okay, remains. It's a difficult question, yeah? Why?
Well, in some way, everyone who is involved in the project is involved in finance. But if you ask, is it a specific task?
Okay. Okay, here in the front row, someone says, actually everybody is somehow involved in finance if you're involved in KEMA. But yeah, how specific should it be? Okay, so 2 people dare to say yes to this question. So who is involved in water resources? Maybe also everyone then, isn't it? Well, half of the people in the room feels involved, and the other one doesn't feel involved. So I think I'm curious what our next speaker will think of this. So please give a warm welcome for the Senior Water Resources Specialist at the Asian Development Bank, Geoffrey Wilson. So, Geoffrey, the half of the audience feels like a water resource specialist. Did you expect it?
I thought there'd be more on water resource, and I thought there'd be more on financing as well.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit surprised.
You were a little bit surprised by that. So maybe it influences your talk about the economics and financing of nature-based solutions in Asia and the Pacific.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
Please take the stage.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Geoff Wilson from the Asian Development Bank, and I'm going to give a presentation on the economics and the financing of nature-based solutions. Just quickly, just to say that I'm very pleased to be back here in Holland. I spent 1 year in 1993, 1994 at IHE Delft, studying hydroinformatics under Professor Mike Abbott. And I can't believe that it's been 25 years since I have been back to Holland, so I'm really pleased to be back. This morning there was a Mentimeter vote on the enablers, and financing came a close second, well, second but equal with a couple of other enablers. And listening to the presentations yesterday, I kept asking myself the question, how much did this cost? And it didn't. The answer to that question didn't really come out until yesterday afternoon. So, and it was mentioned earlier today. So can I ask the audience, hands up, who knows how much the Mark of Wadden cost? Probably about half, maybe a bit more. Okay. So it costs slightly more than 75 million euro. Okay? Now, I also want you to ask yourself, I don't want you to respond to this question, but to ask yourself, was that 75 million euro well spent? Was it a good investment? Was it a very good investment? Was it a poor investment? Don't answer the question. Okay. So I'm going to talk about techniques and approaches now for determining the cost effectiveness of nature-based solutions from an economic point of view. And then perhaps within we can judge whether some of these investments are actually worth it or not. But I'm not going to dwell on the technical aspects, which we all are familiar with. I'm going to concentrate more on the economics and the financing. And, you know, despite the multiple benefits from nature-based solutions, there is a critical barrier to the widespread adoption and upscaling of nature-based solutions. And I believe this is due to a lack of understanding of the role of economics and the financing and how they play in the mainstreaming and scaling up of nature-based solutions, particularly who pays for nature-based solutions and how they can be financed. Just to give you a background of ADB, we finance development projects in Asia and the Pacific for developing countries. And we have a Strategy 2030, which is committed to ADB achieving a prosperous, inclusive, and resilient and sustainable Asia and Pacific. And part of our Strategy 2030 is our third operational priority, which is tackling climate change, building climate and disaster resilience, and enhancing environmental sustainability. And in this context, that is specifically, nature-based solutions are specifically mentioned in our Strategy 2030. So, while nature-based solutions are increasing in their demand, there is still a problem implementing. And this is due, I believe, to a lack of knowledge of the technical and the economic and the financial aspects of designing a nature-based solution and building a business case around that and creating what we call a bankable solution. So let's start with the economics. Almost all projects at ADB require us to undertake an economic analysis. So what does an economic analysis need? We need to develop a stream of benefits and costs. This is an annual stream of benefits and costs. And we need to turn these into monetary values. So we need to have this monetary stream of benefits and costs over the full life cycle of the project, which may be 50 or 100 years or more. And we need to bring in all the benefits, all the co-benefits, all those externalities. We need to bring them in, internalize them, and put them into monetary values. And what we're after at the end of the day is our economic net present value and our economic internal rate of return. These are our economic measures, and they're very much related. And for ADB to finance a project, the economic internal rate of return has to exceed 9%. That's our threshold. However, if the project generates environmental benefits, then we can reduce that to 6%. And environmental benefits, and I quote here from the guidelines, are such as pollution control, protection of the ecosystem, flood control, and control of deforestation. Nature-based solutions is not specifically mentioned, but I think it's well covered. So many of these projects have a primary purpose. For example, flood risk management, where you'll have reduced damages. But they'll usually have additional co-benefits. And many of these are water-related, but some of them are not necessarily water-related. For example, the creation of an ecosystem or restoration can create improvements to the fisheries, forest resources, biodiversity, tourism, landscape values, cultural and recreational services. These are all what we call co-benefits. And we need to turn them into monetary values over the life cycle of the project. So these co-benefits can in turn turn into sort of add-on socio-economic benefits. For example, improved livelihoods and poverty reduction, as well as opportunities for employment and creating new jobs. Nature-based solutions also contribute to the overall resilience of the system. You may be able to think about some more co-benefits for projects that you're looking at. And the accumulative value of these co-benefits can help tip the decision, the economic decision, in favor of the nature-based solutions option. And further, nature-based solutions are often associated, once they're completed, with higher land values. So people like to live adjacent to nice environmental ecosystems. And so the land values go up. And if the land values go up, then the local authority can create higher, can tax that and create higher income for themselves through their rates. But I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Okay, I'm an engineer, so I love these graphs. Okay, so what we have to do is we have to generate this stream. So on the x-axis, we're talking about years, this stream of costs and benefits. So the costs are negative and the benefits are positive. At the beginning, we have some very large costs because we're spending money investing in the capital works. And then afterwards, we have annual maintenance, operation O&M. So that's an annual cost every year. In turn, we are generating benefits. The nature-based solution benefits quite often take a while to develop as the vegetation develops. They might take 5 or 10 years to come up. And once they've generated their full potential, then we have an annual stream of benefits. That's not income, it's benefits. The economic internal rate of return is subject to a large number of criticisms, and many of these are justified. It is the approach that ADB takes in determining whether a project is bankable. And at the moment, at this point in time, it's the approach that ADB and a number of other organizations use to determine whether a project is bankable. But it does have its pitfalls. And until it's replaced by something better, it is the approach that we're stuck with. So in this fictional example I have here, with the costs and benefits, we need to discount these by a discount factor in order to bring those future costs or benefits to present worth, so we can compare them as a present value. And we do that using a discount factor. And what I've drawn here are two different discount factors. There's the 6% and the 9%. I drew them specifically because, remember, the threshold for ADB is 9%, except for nature-based solutions type approaches where the economic internal rate of return is 6%. So there's your 6% is the black, and the 9% is the green. And so that you'll notice that two things here. Firstly, 6% internal rate of return is easier to achieve than a 9% internal rate of return. But I think more importantly for nature-based solutions is that with 6%, the distant benefits and costs, but primarily the benefits, the distant benefits are being accounted for more significantly than with the 9%. You see, after about 40 years, at 9%, we've discounted the cost or the benefit basically to zero. But with the 6%, we're still at, well, it's still low, but it's still at 10%. Now, one of the pitfalls of this approach, you can think of a reservoir, for example, and we want to rehabilitate the catchment of the reservoir and reforest it and put some sediment control practices in place in order to extend the life of that reservoir, say from 80 years to 100 years, right? So that benefit is not going to kick in until 80 years' time. So we're extending the life of the reservoir. We're not getting that benefit until 80 years. And in this case, under whether you're talking about 6% or 9%, you basically discounted all those benefits to nothing. So using this measure as an indicator of economic feasibility for the example I've just given you would show that there's no economic reason for extending the life of the reservoir. Okay, so for me that's a no-brainer. Extending the life of the reservoir is a no-brainer. But according to this economic measure, it would not stack up. So there are problems with this economic internal rate of return approach. So what we do here is we multiply the cost and benefit streams by the discount factors, and we're here left with the discounted values, which are now in present value, and we sum them up, or effectively take the area under the curve, because this is negative and this is positive. And if the sum is positive, then it gives us a net positive value, a present worth value, and then the project is justified or sustainable from an economic point of view. So this is the approach that we use. I've just got to find my point here. So you can see now that we need to bring in as many of those co-benefits I was talking about as we can in order to justify the economic feasibility. And it's not always easy to quantify these co-benefits. Like, how do you quantify healthiness, biodiversity, quantify in monetary values, landscape, cultural values, recreational services? These are real benefits. We're not making them up. They are real benefits, but and they need to be included in the economic analysis. They're just difficult to quantify in monetary terms. But we need to do it. If we don't, we risk compromising the economic feasibility of the project. So in practice, what we do is we address the easy ones first, and if it passes the economics, then we're fine. If it doesn't pass the economics, then we have to start relying on bringing in the ones that are more difficult to quantify one by one. And that's how we do it in practice. Okay, so last week I was in Seoul, and I deliberately went to this stream, the Cheonggaecheong stream. It's quite well known. It previously was covered. It was a slum area. There were little industries on top of the river. There was a highway passing, but it was a horrendous place. And then the Korean government decided in the late 1990s that they would rehabilitate this and turn it into what is potentially a nature-based solution. I say potentially because there's still a lot of concrete there. But this is in the middle of a city of 10 million people, surrounded by high-rise buildings. And the riverbed is sediment, and there are trees and shrubs, as you can see. There are fish, and there are storks and herons feeding off those fish in the middle of Seoul. So what was the cost of this? $335 million US. Okay, now I'm not sure whether a cost benefit has ever been done before or since, but this project came under a lot of criticism before it was developed. Now everyone loves it. When I was walking down there, there's people, it's a really nice place to go and chill out in the middle of Seoul. So, I mean, there are a number of benefits, as we can see here. And one of the major benefits was the increase in land values. So previously, this was a horrible slum area, and the land values were very low. Now, everyone wants to live close by this, so the land values have gone up. But interestingly enough, when you do the ADB's economic internal rate of return computation, you cannot include the increase in land values as a benefit. And that's because it's regarded as double counting. Because the increase in land values are the result of all those co-benefits that I was talking about, the healthiness, the livability. So if you were to add the land prices value increase, then you'd be double counting. And we don't allow that. So demonstrating the economic soundness of an investment is one of the greatest challenges, I believe, facing nature-based solutions. Here's another project I've been working on in Nandi, Fiji, where Nandi town floods, and we were looking at resolving the flood risk for Nandi town and the surrounding areas. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to take advantage of the storage in the floodplain and use that more optimally. Sorry, it's flowing kind of in this direction towards the west. So we wanted to take advantage of the available storage in the floodplain, use it more effectively, and then we wanted to increase the conveyance of the river downstream of Nandi town. And then we did the EIA, and we did the aquatic survey for the environmental impact assessment, and it deemed that the river was a natural and a critical habitat. And because it was a natural critical habitat, we could not touch the river. We could not dredge the river. So the only way to increase the conveyance here was to lower the floodplain. So we came up with one solution, which was to lower the floodplain to just above high tide and plant it in pasture. And then the other option is the option we see here, was to lower the floodplain even further to about mid-tide and plant it in mangroves. So we've got two options. We can compare those options from an economic point of view. From a hydraulic point of view, from a performance point of view, both options performed quite similarly. So the additional roughness of the mangroves compared to the pasture kind of compensated the additional lowering of the flow area that we created if we lowered it even further. So now we can compare them. So let's compare the costs, okay? So the cost of, we're comparing it to the base case, which is the pasture. So the additional cost of creating a mangrove habitat is the additional excavation and relocation of that sediment, okay? Then there are additional benefits. So those additional benefits are fisheries, tourism, cultural is there as well, recreation. So what we can do is we can look at what we call the marginal costs and the marginal benefits. These are the difference. So the difference between the base case and the mangrove case, the difference in the cost is the marginal cost. The difference in the benefits is the marginal benefits. So we can compare the marginal costs to the marginal benefits. And in this case, the marginal costs exceeded the marginal benefits. It was close, but from an economic point of view, the mangrove option did not stack up against the pasture option from an economic point of view. But the economic point of view is not the sole determinant in the decision making. However, in this case, the pasture option became our baseline option from which to proceed with. And we're not actually proceeding at this time with that project. So everyone loved the mangrove concept, but it didn't stack up. So as I can imagine, you may have some questions on economics, and I'm happy to answer those questions. But now I'm going to move towards financing. And this is financing of ADB projects. So financing nature-based solutions can be a challenge. And at the moment, there is a gap between the current investments in nature-based solutions and what is required around the world to meet climate change and biodiversity and land degradation targets. But there are a range of financing instruments and approaches which are available to implement and to maintain and mainstream and upscale nature-based solutions. And we can do this at various scales and in various contexts in order to close this gap. But specifically, we've got public, private, and blended financing tools. These are the tools available in which to develop our nature-based solutions. And we can do this across terrestrial and marine ecosystems. And we involve multiple stakeholders and in areas of varying climates and income levels. So as part of Strategy 2030 that I mentioned earlier, ADB is committed to raising $100 billion of climate financing from our own sources until 2030. And I mention this because there is a synergy between nature-based solutions and climate adaptation. And so if ADB has we don't have a nature-based solutions target. We have a climate adaptation, climate financing target, which includes climate adaptation. So we can leverage off ADB's target of $34 billion in climate adaptation financing, or $100 billion in total climate financing. We can leverage off this in order to start upscaling nature-based solutions. So actually there's plenty of money out there in order to finance projects. But the problem is not the lack of projects. The problem is the lack of readiness and bankable projects. So, and these includes bankable environment and social governance projects. There are a number of financiers out there willing to put money into these projects, these environmental projects, but they need to demonstrate that these projects are bankable. So, and there are a number of other ways that we can leverage off. For example, we can leverage off blended financing. We can create income streams. We can redistribute risk, and we can create a scalable portfolio. These are some of the ideas that we can do to kind of leverage and increase the uptake of nature-based solutions, make it easier for financial institutes like the Asian Development Bank to finance. So what I've listed here are the main sources of financing that are available. And MDBs, multilateral development banks like the World Bank, like ADB, is one source. Then you've got sort of bilateral development partners, IFIs, like KfW or JICA, you may have heard of these. Then you've got the GCF and GEF, but then you've probably got the most important one, which is your domestic public sources. You see, governments will often use the public purse to fund nature-based solutions. And they get this from their taxes and levies. And the reason they do so is because there's seldom a significant income stream from the nature-based solutions. So the domestic public finance is essential for scaling up and mainstreaming nature-based solutions. And this is because the markets alone are generally not effective at providing public goods. So ADB's sovereign financing, so it's sovereign, it's going to the government, it's a loan to the government. This is regarded as public finance. But there's a lot of private finance available as well. And this private financing is looking for a low-risk return on their investment. And many of the MDBs and the IFIs are looking for ways to blend private financing with the public financing. In terms of ADB's financial instruments, we rely very much on what we call the ordinary capital resources, the OCR. And so regular market OCR sovereign loans are generally made to our developing member countries that have attained a higher level of economic development. And regular OCR also supports our private operations. We have a private sector operations as well. And to finance our OCR lending operations, ADB issues debt securities. And we do this in the international and the domestic market. So ADB and other organizations like the World Bank, we're AAA rated by the various international rating organizations, Fitch, Moody's, S&P. So what we can do is we can loan at very close to LIBOR rates, and then we can on-loan to our developing member country clients at something slightly higher than LIBOR, which is a rate that they could never get anywhere else because we can spread our risk, and because we offer probably the best rates that are on the market, nobody defaults. So we can offer something which the government cannot get themselves because they might be rated C or B+. So this is kind of the best rate, and the World Bank do this as well. We are in competition with the World Bank, but we work with them from time to time as well. So this is kind of our business model. And so our concessional OCR loans are available to lower income developing member countries. We have this, this fund called the Asian Development Fund. Now, this provides grants to ADB's poorest and most vulnerable developing member countries. So the ADF plays a catalytic role in supporting these projects, primarily around a couple of themes. These are areas that are not normally invested in by governments. They're underinvested in. For example, the provision of regional public goods. And I mentioned that regional public goods they have to be financed by governments because there's no necessarily income stream. But also towards supporting disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation and others. Grant financing is very important, to sweeten the deal. We need to make these loans as attractive as possible. And so we have access to a number of other grant facilities. And I mentioned many of them here, but I think of interest, and this is just a few, there's about 30 of them, but this is the ones that we tap into for water type projects. And I just want to mention the first one, the Water Financing Partnership Facility, because this has received $116 million in fund contributions to date. But I wanted to mention it because one of the financing partners is the government of the Netherlands. And there are other partnerships, like philanthropists, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So these organizations, the governments or the philanthropists, they will give us money that we can disperse as grants in order to sweeten the deal and maybe tip the project towards nature-based solutions, for example. Really? 1 minute. Okay, and we also have a number of other grants that provide technical assistance. The financing instruments, the main ones I've bolded out here: market-based instruments, green bonds, payment for ecosystem services, public-private partnership. When you're trying to finance a project, you need to understand the project. You need to understand what possibilities are out there for financing it. Each project is unique, and if you can understand all these things and bring the partners together, it must be such a difficult job to do. But if it can be done, then you end up having something like the Mark of Wadden in reality. I need to jump ahead. So here are some barriers, but I won't talk about them. And here are some ideas where governments can remove barriers and make it easier for nature-based solutions to come in. ADB's role, okay, I won't talk about ADB's role, but we have a significant role in developing countries, and nature-based solutions is one of the areas that we're pushing at the moment. And we develop knowledge, and one of our knowledge products was written by Bregje van Wesenbeeck, who you probably all know. Did I get your name wrong? Did I pronounce it wrong?
My surname.
Van Beek.
It's a problem today.
Wesenbeeck. Sorry.
Sorry, I made a mistake. Thank you.
I'm promoting you.
Yeah,
and here's a summary of everything that I've discussed today. How much time do I have? Can I just take 1 minute? Because what I want to do, okay, so here's an example of some of the nature-based solutions projects that we have financed or helped financed. And I have about 20 of these slides. I'm not going to go through them all, but the reason I put them up here is because of this part. For each of these projects, and all these projects include an element of nature-based solutions. They're not solely a nature-based solution project, they include an element of nature-based solution. But I've summarized the financing here. And for example, this is 550 million project. Our ordinary capital reserves provide 400 million of that. The AFD, which is a grant, has kicked in $100 million in order to make this appealing for the government. And the government itself has kicked in 50 million. And again here, in this case, we've got almost 30 millions from Geoff. So we would do that processing ourselves, and that's quite difficult to get GCF and Geoff financing. There's a lot of processing that goes there. And this is a $4 million grant from the UCCRTF. And as I go through, you'll see, okay, here's some co-financing from KfW. Okay, here's a grant, a $13 million grant. Here's a 50 million, is it a $10 million grant.
You make it sound so easy to get money. Yeah. I was wondering when I heard your story, maybe I'm asking a stupid question. I'm good in asking stupid questions. Is there some kind of European development bank? Yeah.
Well, there is. There's the European Infrastructure Development Bank, is it? But they fund European projects.
Exactly.
Do they fund Asian projects outside of Europe? I'm not sure.
No. I was wondering if the Marke Wadden could use a larger finance organization. So, but
the Marke Wadden project didn't rely on financing from loans or bonds. It was equity. Yeah. And some of that came from grant through the lottery.
But you gave us some ideas on how to finance it in a more long-term way, didn't you?
Thank you.
Yeah. Is there one person having a? Yeah, there are lots of questions. So shall we do that? Then we have a little bit less time for lunch, but we had a lot of time anyway. So this person was the first. Whoops.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm Tom van der Haar from Waardenburg Ecology, and thanks for your putting us in the real world, back into the real world. And it's very interesting, several projects you mentioned, mangrove development, coastal development, and I think that they're also are very important for carbon sequestration. So I wonder, and you included that in your climate mitigation measures. So what are and of course in Asia, the mangroves, seagrass is extremely important for blue carbon. And that's also part of voluntary carbon offsets. So how much is now currently in those projects actively involved in this voluntary carbon offsets from industry? I would very much interested to know, because in Asia it's such a potential large market, especially also for habitat restoration like mangroves and seagrass.
So how much is entropy involved?
Yeah, this is quite a relevant question, because it's something that we're looking at more and more at the moment. So in our economic guidelines, we can take the carbon capture, the carbon sequestration, if it can be measured or estimated, and we can include that in the economic analysis by using the shadow price of carbon. And ADB has I can't remember exactly what the number is, but we have a shadow price of carbon that we can include in the economic analysis. That's typically how we do it. You need to remember that that carbon, mangroves are a good carbon capture, but some of the projects actually release methane. For example, if you create a reservoir, all that organic material is released over time through methane. So sometimes you have a positive Right, yeah, okay. Sometimes you'll have a positive and sometimes you'll have a negative. But it's being included in the economic analysis more and more. As of July next year, all sovereign projects at ADB will be aligned with the Paris Agreement.
Okay, good. There is another question over there. Yes. The microphone comes straight to you.
Oh yeah. So thank you for your interesting talk. I was just wondering, a question that popped into my head was, you talk about these different projects that if we establish nature, we, for example, establish mangrove forests or other ecosystems, then you have this whole chain of ecosystem services. And I was just wondering, I tried to find the right word in English, but it comes down to the manufacturability of nature. If you, for example, plant mangroves, can you always assume that it turns into a healthy, functioning ecosystem which has all these benefits? Because that's often quite challenging, I think, to properly restore a system in that way. So I was just wondering, in all these calculations and assumptions, how do you see that factor?
They are assumptions. You have to make an assumption, and you need to justify your assumption. And there's so many assumptions that you need to make, but you need to justify them in order to proceed.
Based on science?
Well,
probably.
Based on science and publications,
yeah.
You can't just
no.
Justify it by which way the wind's blowing. So you need to justify it. But there is also, as part of the economic analysis, we do look, I forget what it's called, we look at the margin of error and we look at kind of which factors would have the greatest influence on the economic internal rate of return. And we need to make sure that those ones which are sensitive are better estimated, so to speak. Yeah.
Interesting question. Do you have time for one more? Or two more, maybe? Okay, those
Hi.
two.
I have a question. I was wondering, how do you avoid that financing is preferencing restoration projects that give more financial benefits? So, for example, shallow marine ecosystems, they are very challenging in restoration and cost more money. But we do not want that maybe land restoration projects, they all the time get financed, and all the marine projects don't get financed because they don't bring that much financial benefit, and then they are lagging behind.
So are you comparing two options for the same solution, or two options for different areas, or both?
It's more just like if you want to finance a restoration project, you have money and you want to look at like, what's the financial benefit? Then we see this is a lot more, for example, I'm a seagrass specialist. A seagrass restoration is very challenging. Takes a long time, takes a lot of money. There's still not sufficient knowledge yet on how to restore that. While maybe other type of ecosystems are much further already in their restoration successes. So that means that seagrass restoration projects would not get so quickly funded, maybe, because it is so difficult, and it also doesn't really get the attention because it's so difficult to work with it.
So
but it's actually very necessary.
How do you cope with innovative restoration projects that the benefits are not clear yet?
Well, okay, so we do the economic analysis. We will always do the economic analysis. You may do different options and compare them. But the economic analysis is not the sole decision-making criteria. We can accept projects which do not exceed the threshold of 6% or the 9%. We can still accept those projects if there are other drivers. So the economic has been quantified, but there are other drivers or considerations in the decision-making process.
And what's the next most important driver then?
Probably politics.
Politics, yeah, yes. You want to respond on this, Can I have the microphone here, please? We have 2 microphones, yes. And then we have one more last question, and then we'll go for lunch, just to make sure your stomach, I'm hearing your stomach already.
So it could be politics, perhaps, but I was also intrigued by the role of charity money. Does it disturb your economic analysis? Or could it support? Because I can imagine also those initiatives that might be economically not that feasible, but by charity money you could get things started up.
As far as I can tell, charity money does not come into the economic analysis. It comes into the financial analysis. And you need to, of course, make it financially sustainable and economically sustainable.
Yeah.
But grant financing, wherever it comes from, will always, tip the balance. Well, I guess there needs to be enough grant financing to tip the balance. And so what our job is to go looking for that grant financing.
Yeah. All right, one more question.
Yeah, thank you. I understand that in your economic analysis you are evaluating ecosystem services for nature-based solutions. Is that for you a challenge? Because we understand for developing a business case, evaluating and quantifying ecosystem services is so extremely difficult. Did you already have a way how to do it? And is that publicly available?
Okay, I don't do it because this is done by economists. I'm not an economist, but I work on projects where they are done. It is challenging, and you need to draw on published data, which is available out there. So you just need, like for example, what you've just done with the Wadden. If you could somehow develop what we call a knowledge product and get all the information on these potential ecosystem services, and if you could quantify them somehow and publish that, then other people will be starting to quote Wadden as this is where I got my information from. I don't know if that information is available. I don't know if it's public. But that's what is typically done. So we're standing on the shoulders of giants. Everyone's building upon each other. But you can't just, you need to pin your estimates on published data or willingness to pay surveys. You can go out and get surveys. There's many ways of doing it. It's probably quite highly uncertain. If you're bringing Australia data into a developing country, or let's say Dutch data into India, how do you transfer that approach? Do you just scale it by the GDP, or are there other ways of scaling it to a different location? Whether it's even appropriate to a different location. It's fraught with so many difficulties, and this is one of the main hurdles. If the economics is one of the decision-making criteria, then you need to go through these hurdles, and it's not easy.
And this is different for every system. You cannot copy-paste it, never.
No.
No. Unfortunately. And there isn't any open science paper, any review?
Oh, there's lots. There's lots of stuff out there.
Yeah.
You just have to find the one which is applicable for your case.
Must be some researcher in here, because we're with so many intelligent researchers here that has an answer as well. So let's find out during lunch, and let's thank you, Geoffrey Wilson, for this presentation. Yes. So this afternoon you can follow the workshop program in here, and Friday, so tomorrow, you can join the Wadden excursion by bus and boat, isn't it? There is any update on it? Oh, okay. Yeah? Yeah. I'd like to just say, if you registered for the bus from Amsterdam, it leaves at the other side, isn't it, of the water? So near at the central station. For those who have just registered for the excursion tomorrow, you meet at the Harbor Batavia Haven in Lelystad at the sailing ship, which is called Abel Tasman. And the address is in the email you received, and you can see it on the screen as well. I hope. Yeah. These are the, okay, this is the afternoon workshop. So this is the schedule for workshops this afternoon. And you can also see it on other screens in the venue when you leave this room. So I would like to thank you all for your contribution this morning, and I wish you an inspiring afternoon and excursion tomorrow. Thanks. If you have finished your lunch at around 12:30 and you are into seeing a movie about the Marka Wadden, which lasts 1 hour, please feel free to go to this room again at 12:30, and then you can enjoy. It is 12:30. Okay, maybe shouldn't we do it a bit later then? Oh. It will start during lunch. Okay, well. Then we don't know exactly the time, but feel free to come and sit here. Okay, let's enjoy our lunch.